Hello, everybody. My name is Kay Toombs, and I'm speaking to you from Texas because unfortunately I was unable to come to the Homestead Festival in June. I was going to give a talk on the effects of technology, so now I'm happy to talk to you long distance instead of personally. So first of all, let me introduce myself. I grew up in England, but I've lived in Texas for over half my life. So my family in England assure me I have a Texas drawl. So for many years, I was a professor of philosophy at Baylor University. And for 26 years, I've been part of an agrarian-based intentional Christian community here in Texas, where we have a 500-acre farm and a craft village where we show crafts such as woodworking, pottery, spinning, and weaving. And we have a school, the Plowshare Institute for Sustainable Culture, where we give classes in homesteading and sustainable skills. So I became interested in the effects of digital technology when I was a college professor, and I began to notice that in addition to its benefits, the increasing use of technology was having noticeably negative effects on my students. So I began to look at the research, and I wrote this book called Changing Our Minds: How Digital Technology Affects Our Children and Disconnects Us from Reality and from each other. And I looked at all the research that there is on these effects, and I try to bring this book up to date every couple of years. So today what I want to do is just share with you a few of these effects, and I'm going to concentrate on the effects on children, although in the book I talk about the effects on all of us. So just to set the stage of the world we live in, 2/3 of the world's population use the internet. That's over 5.35 billion people. And on average, people spend 6.5 hours a day on the internet, 4 hours on their mobile devices. Almost all Americans have access to the internet, and 98% of 30 to 49-year-olds have access. And of these, most of them, 96.5%, access by mobile device. So what about young people? Well, this generation grew up with cell phones. They never knew a time when they couldn't be online from any place at any time. So almost all teens, 95%, have access to a smartphone. 97% of teens say they're online daily, and almost half, 46% of those, report they're online constantly. Research shows that 13 to 18-year-olds spend over 8 hours a day on screens, entertainment media, games, social media, videos, music. And it's 8.5 hours a day because many times they're on 2 devices at a time. They might be watching TV while looking at social media or texting their friends. Children 5 and under are the fastest growing users of digital media. Half the babies under the age of 2 interact with a smartphone, and 3/4 of them watch television. By age 4, 3/4 have their own mobile device, and by age 2, most use a device daily. So we now have holders for iPads to go on strollers, car seats, bouncy seats, kids' potties, and the like. Kindergarten teachers tell me that when children come to kindergarten, they cannot hold a pencil. They have no motor skills because all they've done is swipe. One teacher told me that when the children were coloring, this little boy kept pressing on the page and he was getting very aggravated. And she said to him, "What's the matter?" And he said, "It won't delete." Well, we saw this when we were teaching children in a summer camp how to use a drop spindle. And to do that, you hold the spindle up, you twist it, and you pull. And this 11-year-old boy said, "I can't do that. I can't hold my hands up," because all he did was swipe. Kindergarten teachers also say that when children come to kindergarten, they're unable to make eye contact with either their teachers or their peers. And teachers in high school say this is the same problem for children in high school. They're unable to make eye contact with their peers. She said it almost seems that they all have a slight autistic disorder, but it's because they're used to being on screens all the time. One of the things to notice about technology is that it captivates attention in a way that is compelling. They've done studies with babies where infants are looking at a book or a colored puzzle, and if you say, look, and you point up in the corner, the baby will look. If that child is on a screen and you say, look, they will not look up, and it appears as if they don't even hear you. If there is a television in the background and there are 12, 24-month-old babies in the room, they will not play because they will look at the television. It turns out that research shows that preschool children, those who spent the most time on the screens, have problems with language development, and they're likely to exhibit behavior problems and have poor attention by the time they're age 5. In fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics says no screens for children younger than 2, except for the possibility of video chatting with a relative, and then only if they are accompanied by an adult. It turns out now that sadly psychiatrists are seeing children who are addicted to screens. There is now something called tech tantrums, where if you take the iPad away from the child, they go into an amazing fit. So what about the effects of technology on the brain? Multiple research studies in different countries confirm that that internet use changes the physical structure of the brain. And what is most alarming to professionals is that children's brains are still developing, and they're afraid that their brains are going to be wired differently. In 2015, the National Institutes of Health started a study with 10,000 children, and they're going to follow these same children for 10 years, beginning at age 9 and 10. The first studies released showed that children who spend the most time on screens have thinner cortices in their brains, and there's also a relationship between the time they spend on screens and mood disorders. They did a follow-up with the same children when they were 11 and 12, and they continued to have depression and anxiety, and they continued to show these brain changes. The other thing is that the way information is delivered, rapid, constantly changing, links, pop-up ads and the like, means that it's very distracting and it affects the ability to pay attention. Young people have dozens of apps, and they have on average 1 interruption a minute. So now millions of children are now diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. And Francis Collins, the director of the National Institutes of Health, reported on a 2-year study which showed of 2,500 high school children, and it demonstrated that those who consumed the most digital media were more likely to meet the criteria of ADHD. Well, what about the effects on education and learning? The majority of schools now have at least 1 device per student at all levels. Now, we thought at the outset that this would revolutionize learning, that you'd be able to look up information in libraries across the world and so forth. Sadly, we have found that there have been no educational gains since the technology was introduced into the classroom. In fact, scores have been negative with math, reading, research skills across the board. 2/3 of teachers say that the technologies distract rather than help. 92% of college students say that they text or look at social media during class. Teachers also say because of the massive input of information, students cannot pick out relevant information. If you say to them, why did you put that in your research paper? They say they don't know. And they have no patience for in-depth research. Studies show that less than 1% of Google searches go past the first page. And of course, you realize that since Google has collected all the information about which websites you're looking at, that when you do a Google search, you will get on the first page what Google thinks you're interested in seeing. And if you don't go past the first page, you're not going to get too much information. Now that we have artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, teachers say that it's very difficult to assess the students' learning because they're using the technology to write their papers and so forth. But what about how this affects other aspects of life? And I want to talk a little bit about the disconnection from reality. In considering the effects on children, several researchers have noted that we have exchanged play-based childhood, where the majority of time was spent with friends in the real world, for a phone-based childhood. So this is the first generation to grow up in a completely denatured environment. And this has happened in the last decades. Children no longer grow food, they no longer are with animals, they no longer are outside playing, they are no longer outside with their friends. And since the majority of their time is spent immersed in virtual reality, children have become disengaged from and disinterested in the natural world. Teachers say that when they take their children out to, say, look at a pond or something, the children are used to seeing videos on the Discovery Channel, and they find this boring because on the Discovery Channel there's always something happening. There's always some animal appearing. Since they have no exposure to nature, children are deeply ignorant about natural processes that used to be commonplace knowledge. And we see this when we host about 5,000 children a year who come on field trips to our farm, and many of them have no idea where food comes from. They don't know where eggs and milk come from. We have one little boy who was horrified to see that you actually dug potatoes out of the ground. Children are also becoming confused about what is real and what is virtual. Sherry Turkle, who's written a book called iGen, about the effects of technology, was with her daughter on a boat trip on the Mediterranean, and they saw a jellyfish, and her 8-year-old daughter said to her, "Look, Mommy, a jellyfish, it looks so real." When she mentioned this to an executive at Disney World, he said that the visitors to Animal World prefer the robotic animals to the real animals because they do more things. We also knew somebody who lived in Dubai, which is a technology-oriented culture. When her young child first saw a real dog, she said, "Wow, how many batteries does that thing take?" Well, another way we have become disconnected is to become disconnected from each other. And one of the most obvious effects of digital revolution is a seismic change in the way we relate. We no longer relate face-to-face, we text, video chat, look at Facebook, FaceTime. So the first harm for children, and actually for all of us, is social deprivation. Time that young people spend with their friends face-to-face has plummeted. Most of them spend their time in their rooms on their phones. One little girl said that she spent her whole summer holiday in her bedroom. She said, my bed has an image of my body because all I do is video chat with my friends. We've also found that there's something called the internet paradox, and that is that the more connections we have online, the less human contact we have, and the more loneliness there is. So as a result, people may have hundreds of friends on social media, but loneliness is at epidemic proportions. In a recent survey, 1 in 2 Americans said they reported feeling lonely. In 2023, last year, the Surgeon General put out an 81-page health advisory on what he called the epidemic of loneliness. It turns out that loneliness and isolation increase your risk for cardiovascular disease, stroke, anxiety, depression, and dementia, and it's equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. As a sad commentary on the loss of human contact and loneliness characterizing our society, psychiatrist Aaron Kheriaty reported about a young man who committed suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. When his psychiatrist went to his apartment, he found a note. The young man had written, I am going to walk to the bridge. If one person smiles at me along the way, I will not jump. One of the most prevalent forms of social interaction is social media. Social media has been absolutely disastrous for the mental health of our children, and particularly girls. So much so that in May 2023, the Surgeon General put out a 25-page advisory on social media and youth mental health, and noted that there is growing evidence that social media is associated with harm to youth mental health. 87% of 12 to 15-year-olds are on social media every day. More than 1/4 visit more than 10 times a day, and most teens spend 1.5 hours at least a day on social media. 35% say they use it constantly. Studies have shown definitively that the more time on screens, the more likely a person is to be depressed. And multiple studies show that this is not just a correlation, that social media is a cause of depression. The rates of depression and anxiety for teens have skyrocketed all over the world, not just in the United States. According to the National Institutes of Health, 3.7 million adolescents aged 12 to 17 in the US had at least one major depressive episode in 2021 with severe impairment. Now that represents a 145% increase for girls since 2010. Suicide rates for adolescent girls increased 167% from 2010 to 2021. So what happened in 2010? What happened in 2010 was the pairing of smartphones and social media. Just last month, the Surgeon General urged Congress to pass a bill to require social media platforms to carry a warning label similar to those on tobacco products, warning of the mental health consequences, particularly for young people. Well, why are these effects? Well, the first thing is that most of the interaction is peer-to-peer with no adult supervision. Social media is more harmful to girls than boys because they're more sensitive to visual comparisons. And in 2010, they developed an iPhone with a front-facing camera, which made it possible to take pictures of yourself. So this magnifies peer-to-peer pressure to look attractive, to look like the latest idol. And also in 2010, Instagram created as an app that could only be used on a smartphone. So teen girls wanted to be on Instagram, so they all had to have smartphones. The thing is that in 2021, a whistleblower who worked at Facebook leaked Facebook's own research, and it showed that Instagram made body image worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. 40% reported feeling unattractive and said it began when they got on Instagram, and 13% reported suicidal thoughts, which they said began on Instagram. One of the most addictive features installed on the technology is the like button, which was intended to keep people hooked on the technology. Young girls are absolutely desperate for likes. And so girls as young as 13 are pressured to post revealing pictures to get more likes. The problem is that this can lead to negative comments and to cyberbullying. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, one of the most significant risks for teens is cyberbullying. 1 in 3 teens in high school say they've been cyberbullied, but they don't tell their parents, and they can't get away from it because they can't give up their phones, because if they give up their phones, they won't be able to be in contact with their friends. Well, what about boys? Boys spend more time on video games than they do on social media. So what's happened with boys is they've withdrawn their time and effort from the physical world to spend time in the virtual world, and they've disconnected from real-life communities. So there's been a decrease in the quality of their social relationships, and they also report being lonely. And the rates of depression for boys has also increased, but not as much as girls. 7% of them, however, or more, end up as problematic or addicted users of video games. 97% of boys aged 13 to 17 average more than 2 hours a day on a video game, and some 4 to 6 hours a day. And I personally knew of a child who dropped out of high school because he spent all night playing video games, so he could never get up to go to high school. One of the things, too, is that many parents are completely unaware of the content of video games, many of which are obscenely violent. Despite the propaganda from the multi-billion-dollar video game industry, which made $184 billion in 2023, the results of over 400 studies show that there is a significant association between exposure to media violence and aggressive behavior, angry thoughts, physiological arousal, and desensitivity to violence. Before coming to our community, a young boy who says he was addicted to video games told about how he kept being sent home from school for disruptive behavior, and he said it was because he was mimicking the behavior that he saw in the video games that he played all the time. Also, the internet provides unlimited free hardcore pornography, which is accessible anytime, anywhere. A youth director told me that almost all the boys in his youth group were addicted to pornography, and he said it starts at a very early age. Turns out that 73% at least say they have seen pornography. Over half of them first viewed it when they were 13 or younger, many during the school day, half on school-owned devices. I read an essay by a 16-year-old girl who said that she stumbled on pornography when she was 10 and she went back to the site out of curiosity. She said that all of her peers are addicted to pornography. They call it the new drug. And she warns adults that they have no idea of the content of pornography. The majority of it is extremely violent. It's also important to note that it's not only what the child accesses, but it's the effect of the algorithms collected every time they click onto a website, which then send them data that they've not asked for. As one tragic example, a 14-year-old girl in England committed suicide, and the coroner noted the negative effect of the online content. Once she looked at self-harm and suicide websites, he noted that the algorithms used by Instagram and Pinterest selected content and sent thousands of images to her without her asking for them. And this, he said, contributed to her death in more than a minimal way. In this regard, a psychiatrist said, we used to travel with our children. Now they travel alone on the internet. As soon as children can use a web browser, they have virtually unlimited access to everything on the web, difficult chat rooms, self-harming websites, and a whole world of dark places. Behaviors are influenced by what children view online. In 2017, against the advice of healthcare professionals, Netflix released a teen-oriented drama, 13 Reasons Why, about a girl who committed suicide and left tapes for the 13 people she blamed for her suicide. And it included a graphic 3-minute scene of the girl committing suicide. The series was very popular, had millions of viewers. It was aimed specifically at teens. And psychiatrists note that the admissions to hospitals for children who were threatening suicide rose alarmingly. There's something called suicide contagion. Once suicides are featured, it causes more people to commit suicide. In the same way, there's been a recently alarming increase in eating disorders like anorexia and tic disorders among young girls. So psychiatrists report they are now seeing what they call mass sociogenic illnesses, where young people's behavior has been influenced by influencers on anorexia websites and tic disorder websites. And it turns out that these websites have millions of followers. Teens actually say that YouTube is the site they visit the most and the one thing they would not want to live without. Well, that's the bad news, but maybe we can turn to better news and we can talk about what to do. How can we re-envision our connection with technology in order to provide an alternative environment to live our daily lives? And so what I want to do is to share some steps that some people are recommending and then share our community's experience in being very intentional about our use of technology. First of all, I want to say I appreciate the difficulty. I was speaking at a conference on technology at Baylor several years ago, and somebody asked one of the other presenters, what can we do? And he said, turn off your televisions, homeschool your children, and find a community of like-minded people. Finding a community of like-minded people is essential. A mother just shared with me that her 8-year-old daughter is begging for a smartphone because all her peers have smartphones. I would also like to add that as adults and parents, we have to rethink our own involvement with technology if we're going to help our children. A 2022 study showed that the majority of Americans reach for their phone every 3 minutes. 1/5 are not willing to go without their phone for more than a few hours, and over half said that running out of battery power would be a nightmare scenario. So with regard to some steps that some people are taking, as more parents are becoming alarmed at the effect of the internet on their children, they're choosing not to provide their children with smartphones. A Utah father has launched a company making internet-free cell phones, and he has hundreds of thousands of customers across the United States. Turns out the Silicon Valley executives, who are the people who develop the technology, all choose to send their children to schools that have no technology. They recognize the addictive features that they programmed into it. They limit their children's time at home on screens, and they delay social media. Dr. Jonathan Haidt, who is a professor at New York University, has just written a book called The Anxious Generation. And among the recommendations that he has is to reorient our children away from a screen-based childhood, delay giving a child smartphones till high school, delay social media till 16, have phone-free schools, and he stresses the importance of community, and particularly communities that have a religious underpinning. So now I want to share our community's approach to the use of technology and the benefits that we found in taking steps to disengage from the constant attachment to screens. But I'll say a little more about our community, Homestead Heritage. It was founded in 1973 by one couple in a mission church in the slums of New York City, and they felt God leading them to make an exodus from the mainstream culture to develop an alternative, nurturing environment in which to live out our faith and to sustain families, children, and community. So they moved as a group to Colorado, where they developed sustainable skills, farming, crafts, and in 1990 moved as a whole community to the present location in Texas, where we have about 1,200 people. And in recent years, we've founded sister communities many places in the United States and around the world. Our attitude to technology is that we want to use it, but not be used by it. So most importantly, we do not want technology to disrupt our relationships with each other, with our children, with the land, and with God. And we are constantly reevaluating whether we need to make more changes. There's a saying that we have around here, which is that you can't grow bananas in Alaska. And we realize that there's no way to nurture face-to-face relations in a context that is characterized by virtual communication, nor can you nurture positive character traits in an environment that one commentator has noted is more often than not spiritually degrading. Now, we are not anti-technology. If we were, I would not be speaking to you in this way. But we recognize that it's necessary to use the internet in our businesses and in advertising our programs and classes, such as we offer in Plowshare Institute for Sustainable Culture. And we recognize that it's helpful in connecting with our brothers and sisters in communities that are far away from us here. But with regard to our personal lives, right at the outset, when the community was first founded, they made the decision not to have television because they recognized that having a television would disrupt family relationships and would disrupt social relationships because everybody would be gathered around this TV set. Of course, now we have a situation where most homes in the United States have more than one television, but you don't even need a television anymore because you can access programs on your smartphone, so everybody is sitting in different rooms watching different programs. We also made the decision to have no internet in our homes for private use. Internet is available at a central location for research, and in general, our children do not have cell phones. With our homeschooling, we homeschool our children, so our homeschooling education is not computer mediated, it's experiential and relational and not abstract. And our leisure activities are not screen mediated. We do not play video games or entertain ourselves with the computer, and none of us personally is on social media. So what are the advantages that we have found by making these decisions? Well, in the first place, our children do not miss technology. Often we have people who come up here and they say to our children, "What do you do if you don't have television?" And they say, "How does anybody have time to watch television?" Because they're involved in multiple activities, music, children's choirs, orchestra, crafts, playing games with friends, volleyball, picnics, reading. We have a lot of social gatherings, spend a lot of time out of doors. Children also sometimes work on the farm. We had a wheat harvest recently that we had to get in because it was going to rain. So a phone call went out and a lot of young people went and helped get the wheat harvest in, which they enjoyed doing. Children outside our community who have peers who are not on technology don't miss the technology either. The children who go to the schools where the Silicon Valley parents send their children don't miss the technology because they're with their peers all the time. One little boy said he went to see a friend who was on the technology, and he said all they did was look at their phones. He finally said, "Hi, I'm here." I read an article written by a high school boy, Caleb Silverberg, called "Why I Traded My Cell Phone for an Axe." Well, it turns out that during COVID, he found he was a slave to screens, and he saw that there was a high school in California where they had no technology, and the technology, in addition to the academic work, was replaced with jobs to keep the place running, like chopping wood for the heat for your cabin, cleaning out your cabin, cleaning out the cafeteria. And he said, "I found myself liberated from the constant allure of technology and discovered the joys of engaging face-to-face with lifelong friends." He said, because in the hallways at school, nobody talks to one another because they're all on their phones. A young man in our community who, when he came, said he was addicted to video games. He says it was ruining his life, but he said seeing people spending time together, gardening, doing crafts, playing board games, telling stories, praying or worshiping together taught me to actually live and not just exist. You know, sometimes we have to look at the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is if you're doing one thing, you can't be doing another. Think of the opportunity cost if you're spending 8 hours a day on screens of all the other things you are not able to be doing. Another advantage of real life versus online community is that it fosters intergenerational relationships. In our community, we have interaction of people of all ages, and so it's not limited to peer on social networking. So the habits and behaviors of our children are not dictated by a pressure to conform. And in this kind of an environment, it's natural for people to care for one another. Young people help our elderly with house cleaning, mowing, those kind of tasks. One time we had an elderly lady who was dying of cancer and she could not sleep at night. So a group of our young people volunteered to go and sing for her through the night. Older people in the community often teach classes and craft skills to youngsters, and it also works the other way around. I learned how to weave from a young woman who lives in our community. Also, changing our relationship with technology nurtures family relationships. We're not all in different rooms on different devices, and so we have a lot of family activities together, conversation, reading to young children, playing games. Parents and children often do crafts together. Older children teach younger children crafts, and we spend a lot of time together. And all of this nurtures healthy social relationships. Our children don't have hundreds of friends on social media, but they have close friendships with friends they can visit face to face every day and who will remain their friends for life. The other thing is that we have found a direct relationship with the land, growing food or raising animals, has many additional benefits for our children, including teaching sustainable skills. For one thing, it forms a very different mindset to that of the internet. The mindset of the internet is instant gratification, constant distraction, speed, efficiency. Working with the land, you need patience, perseverance, it takes time. Not everything will go one's way. You have to depend on the weather and so forth. And plus, it teaches ongoing responsibility every day. You have to water the plants. You have to milk the cows. You have to have responsibility. And it also gives one an awareness of the transcendent. Being out in nature gives us an awareness of the transcendent. And researchers have found that involvement with nature has a restorative mental effect. They've used it with children who are addicted to various things, and they've used it with children who have ADHD. And the same thing is true of working on crafts. It teaches character skills, attentiveness, attention to detail, care, striving for quality. In these activities, our children don't have the attention problems that are exacerbated by engagement with the internet. We have never had a child in our community diagnosed with ADHD. And one of the most important things is their minds are not constantly bombarded with information that is not relevant to their lives or harmful, negative, violent content that is disturbing to them. Also, freeing oneself from constant interaction with screens allows for time set aside for spiritual development, prayer, praise, worship, seeking. The focus is not on self or on meeting the demands of social media. In conclusion, in 2003, which is over 20 years ago, the Commission on Children at Risk, which was a group of 33 children's doctors, research scientists, mental health and youth service professionals, issued a report to the nation on the crisis with regard to the deteriorating mental and behavioral health of U.S. children. It was titled Hardwire to Connect. Now, this was before the invention of the smartphone and before technology disconnected us from close face-to-face relationships. But what they concluded was that what was causing the crisis was a lack of close connectedness to other people, a lack of deep connections to moral and spiritual meaning. And they called for a renewing and a rebuilding of authoritative, not authoritarian, communities, which they described as groups of people who are committed to one another over time and who model and pass on at least part of what it means to be a good person and live a good life. Interestingly, now, 20 years later, the Surgeon General entitled his recent advisory on the epidemic of loneliness, and isolation, the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory on the healing effects of social connection and community. So given what we now know about the ways in which the new technologies have profoundly negative effects on our children, it seems ever more urgent to make an exodus from the contemporary technological culture in order to re-envision and rebuild healing communities that provide an alternative nurturing environment for all of us. And as one way to start, I think we need to take very seriously the crisis that we are in, and it's not just children, it's not all of us. And so I would really recommend reading this book because there's a lot more information in the book than I was able to give today. And it is available on Amazon, and it is available on our community's Homestead Heritage website. Well, thank you very much.